The hand that reached up from the bottom of the grave had 6 fingers, and when it spoke, it used my dead grandfather's voice. I need you to stop whatever you are doing and listen to me. What I am about to tell you is not a ghost story meant to entertain you around a campfire. This is a warning, a confession, a desperate attempt to make sure that no one else makes the same mistake I made on the night of October 17th, 2019. I am a grave digger. I have been burying the dead for 25 years. And in all that time, I have followed one rule without exception. A rule passed down through 3 generations of my family. A rule that every worker at Oak Shadow Cemetery knows, but never speaks about in daylight. Never dig a grave after sunset. Never. I broke that rule once. Only once. And what climbed up from the darkness to meet me will haunt me until the day I am lowered into my own grave. My name is Samuel Dawson. I am 47 years old. I was born in Ridley County, Tennessee, in a farmhouse that my great-great-grandfather built with his own hands in 1892. My family has lived on this land for 5 generations, and for 3 of those generations, the men in my family have worked at Oak Shadow Cemetery. We have dug graves for Confederate veterans and civil rights leaders, for murdered children and 100-year-old matriarchs, for preachers and sinners and everyone in between. We have lowered thousands of caskets into the Tennessee clay and covered them with earth that will hold them until Judgment Day. Grave digging is not just a job to me. It is a calling, a sacred duty, a covenant between the living and the dead. I thought I understood that covenant. I thought I understood the rules. I was wrong. Let me tell you about Oak Shadow Cemetery. It sits on a hill overlooking the town of Ridley, surrounded by old-growth forest on 3 sides and a winding Tulane blacktop on the 4th. The cemetery was established in 1847, back when this region was still wild, still dangerous, still haunted by things that the early settlers did not have names for. The oldest graves date back to before the Civil War. Hand-carved limestone markers, so weathered by time that the names have worn away completely, leaving only blank faces staring up at the sky. The cemetery is divided into sections. Near the main entrance, you will find the modern plots, neat rows of polished granite headstones, well-maintained grass, paved pathways for mourners in wheelchairs, solar-powered lights that click on at dusk. This is where most families choose to bury their loved ones. It is peaceful, orderly, safe. But as you walk deeper into the grounds, as you climb the gentle slope toward the tree line, something changes. The headstones grow older. The grass grows wilder. The trees press closer, their branches reaching over the graves like gnarled fingers. The air grows heavier, colder. And if you are paying attention, if you are truly paying attention, you will notice that the birds stop singing. This older section is called the Hollow, and it is where the rule matters most. I was 16 years old when my grandfather first told me about the rule. It was a summer evening in 1988, and I had just finished my first week of work at Oak Shadow, mowing grass, trimming hedges, learning the layout of the grounds. I was proud of myself, eager to prove that I could handle the harder work, the real work, the work of digging graves. My grandfather, Elijah Dawson, was 72 years old that summer. He had been the head groundskeeper at Oak Shadow for over 30 years, and his body showed every day of it. Stooped shoulders, calloused hands, a permanent squint from decades of working under the Tennessee sun. But his mind was sharp, his eyes were clear, and when he spoke, you listened. He sat me down on the tailgate of his old Ford pickup truck, handed me a sweating bottle of RC Cola, and looked me in the eyes with an intensity one had never seen before. "Samuel," he said, "I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to listen like your life depends on it. Because it does." I nodded, suddenly nervous, the cola forgotten in my hand. "There are rules for working in a cemetery," he continued. "Some of them are practical. Always measure twice before you dig. Never leave your tools in the grass where someone could trip on them. Treat every headstone like it's your own mother's. But there's one rule that's more important than all the others combined. Are you listening?" "Yes, sir." He leaned closer. His voice dropped to barely a whisper. "When that sun touches the horizon, you stop working. You put down your shovel. You get in your truck. And you leave. You don't look back. You don't hesitate. You don't convince yourself you've got a few more minutes of daylight left. You leave. And you don't come back until morning." I asked him why. I was 16. I was curious. I had not yet learned to fear the things I could not see. My grandfather's face went pale. He looked away from me, toward the hollow, toward the old graves and the dark trees and the shadows that were already beginning to lengthen as the sun sank toward the hills. When he spoke again, his voice was different, older, haunted, because they wake up when the sun goes down, Samuel. And if you're still there, digging in their ground, disturbing their rest, they will come for you. I did not understand what he meant. Not then. I thought he was trying to scare me, the way grandfathers sometimes scare their grandchildren with tall tales and superstitions. I smiled and nodded and promised to follow the rule, never imagining that one day I would break it, never imagining what would be waiting for me when I did. For 23 years, I followed the rule without question. I planned my work carefully, always checking the weather forecast, always calculating how long each grave would take to dig, always making sure I had enough daylight to finish. On the rare occasions when a burial was scheduled late in the day, I would recruit extra workers to help speed up the digging. 2 men can dig a grave in about 4 hours. 3 men can do it in under 3. I learned the mathematics of death, the precise calculations of depth and width and time that govern my profession. A standard grave is 8 feet long, 3.5 feet wide, and 6 feet deep. That is roughly 72 cubic feet of earth that must be removed, about 4 tons of Tennessee clay, rock, and root. It is backbreaking work, even with modern tools. My grandfather did it with nothing but a spade and a pickaxe. My father added a gasoline-powered trencher to the arsenal. I have a small excavator for the initial digging, but the final shaping, the precise edges, the squared corners, the perfectly level bottom, that still has to be done by hand. There is no machine that can replace the careful work of a grave digger's shovel. I knew the tools of my trade the way a surgeon knows his scalpels. The flat-edged spade for cutting through sod, the round-point shovel for scooping loose earth, the trenching shovel, narrow and long, for working in tight spaces, the pickaxe for breaking through rock and root, the tamping bar for compacting soil, the rope and pulleys for lowering caskets, the wooden planks we lay across the grave so mourners do not have to see the raw earth below. Each tool had its purpose. Each tool had its place. And at the end of every workday, I cleaned them carefully, hung them in the maintenance shed, and did not touch them again until the sun was high in the sky. October 17th, 2019, began like any other day. The forecast called for clear skies and temperatures in the low 60s, perfect weather for outdoor work. I had a routine maintenance schedule: repair a cracked headstone in Section B, reseed a bare patch of grass near the mausoleum, clean out the drainage ditches along the eastern fence. Nothing urgent, nothing that would keep me past sunset. I finished my work around 4:30 in the afternoon and was loading my tools into the truck when my phone rang. It was Henry Garrett, the director of Garrett & Sons Funeral Home. His voice was strained, breathless, like he had been running. He explained that there had been a terrible accident on Highway 25 that afternoon. A family from Kentucky, a man, his wife, and their 2 young children, had been driving through town when a tractor-trailer ran a red light and struck their car at nearly 60 miles per hour. The father was killed instantly. The mother was in critical condition at Ridley Memorial Hospital. The children, both under the age of 10, had survived with minor injuries, but were traumatized beyond comprehension. They had watched their father die. Henry's voice cracked as he delivered the worst part. The family was deeply religious, members of an Orthodox community that required burial within 24 hours of death. Their relatives were already on their way from Kentucky to claim the body. They needed a grave dug by tomorrow morning. Oak Shadow Cemetery was the only option. A distant relative was buried there, which made the family eligible for a plot. Would I help? Could I possibly dig the grave tonight? I looked at the sky. The sun was already sinking toward the tree line, maybe an hour from setting. I thought about the rule. I thought about my grandfather's warning, about the stories I had heard from older workers, about the fear I had seen in their eyes when they spoke of the hollow after dark. And then I thought about those 2 children. I thought about them sitting in a hospital waiting room, their father dead, their mother fighting for her life, their entire world shattered in the space of a single heartbeat. I thought about the comfort that a proper burial might bring them, the closure, the ritual, the knowledge that their father was resting in consecrated ground. I should have said no. Every cell in my body, every lesson I had ever learned, every whisper of warning from generations of Dawson men, all of it screamed at me to refuse. But I was a father, too. I had a daughter, and the thought of her sitting in a hospital, orphaned and terrified, was more than I could bear. I told Henry the first would do it. I would dig the grave tonight. I arrived at Oak Shadow Cemetery at 6:15 p.m. The sun was a burning orange disk balanced on the western hills, and the shadows were already stretching long and dark across the graves. I parked my truck near Section D, Row 12, Plot 8, the location Henry had specified. It was in the transitional area between the newer section and the hollow, close enough to the old graves that I could see their weathered faces watching me from the growing darkness. I gathered my equipment: flat-edged spade, round-point shovel, trenching shovel, pickaxe, tamping bar, measuring tape, wooden stakes, mason's twine, and 4 kerosene lanterns. The lanterns were old, relics from my grandfather's time, but they burned brighter and longer than any battery-powered light. I would need them. The work ahead would take hours. I measured the plot with practiced precision: 8 feet long, 3.5 feet wide, corners squared perfectly with stakes and twine. I cut the sod first, slicing through the grass in neat rectangles that I set aside for later replacement. The soil beneath was soft from recent rain, Tennessee red clay mixed with black loam, easy to work, easy to shape. I began to dig. For the first hour, everything was normal. The sun sank below the horizon, and I lit my lanterns, positioning them at the 4 corners of the grave to cast a pool of flickering orange light around my work area. The familiar rhythm of the digging took over: thrust the shovel into the earth, lever up a load of soil, toss it onto the growing pile beside the grave, repeat. My muscles burned. Sweat dripped down my back despite the cool evening air. I could smell the rich, organic scent of turned earth, the faint sweetness of decomposing leaves, the distant hint of wood smoke from a farmhouse chimney somewhere beyond the trees. I told myself everything was fine. I told myself I was just doing a job. I told myself the rule was superstition, nothing more. It was around 7:30 p.m., when I was about 3 feet deep, that I first noticed the silence. I did not notice it immediately. That is the strange thing about silence. It creeps up on you, replaces the normal sounds of the world so gradually that your brain does not register the change. One moment, you are listening to the chirp of crickets, the rustle of leaves, the distant hoot of an owl. The next moment, you realize those sounds are gone. All of them. At once. The cemetery had become completely, unnaturally silent. No insects. No birds. No wind. Just the sound of my own breathing and the wet chunk of my shovel biting into clay. I stopped digging. I stood motionless in the grave, my heart beginning to pound, my ears straining for any sound. Nothing. The silence pressed against my eardrums like a physical weight. I looked up at the sky, but there were no stars. Clouds had rolled in, thick and black, blotting out the moon. The only light came from my 4 lanterns, their flames suddenly seeming very small, very fragile, very inadequate against the darkness that surrounded them. "Hello," I called out. My voice sounded flat, muffled, as if the darkness was swallowing it before it could travel more than a few feet. "Is someone there?" No answer. Just that terrible, oppressive silence. I told myself I was being foolish. I was a grown man, 47 years old, a professional who had spent his entire life working in cemeteries. I did not believe in ghosts. I did not believe in monsters. I believed in the simple reality of earth and stone and the bodies that lay beneath them. I picked up my shovel and resumed digging. That was when I heard the footsteps. They were faint at first, so faint that I almost convinced myself I was imagining them. A soft, rhythmic sound, like someone walking slowly through grass. I stopped digging and listened. The footsteps stopped, too. I waited, holding my breath, my shovel frozen in mid-swing. Seconds passed. 10, 20, 30. Nothing. I exhaled slowly, shaking my head at my own paranoia, and lifted the shovel again. The footsteps resumed. Closer now. Behind me, moving in a slow, deliberate circle around the grave. I spun around, my shovel raised like a weapon, my eyes scanning the darkness beyond the reach of my lanterns. I saw nothing. Just headstones. Just shadows. Just the darkness that seemed to be pressing closer with every passing second. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice cracking. "This is private property. Show yourself." The footsteps continued. They did not speed up. They did not slow down. They just kept circling, circling, circling. A steady, patient rhythm that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I turned in a slow circle, trying to track the sound, but it was impossible. The footsteps were all around me, surrounding me, closing in. And then I smelled it. It was faint at first, a whiff of something organic, something decayed, like meat left too long in the sun. But it grew stronger with each passing second, filling my nostrils, coating the back of my throat, making me gag. I had smelled death before, I had stood over open caskets and freshly exhumed remains. This was different. This was older. This was wrong. It smelled like centuries of decay, like the bottom of a mass grave, like something that had been buried so long ago that even the worms had abandoned it. The footsteps stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse than the sounds had been. I stood frozen in the grave, my shovel clutched in white-knuckled hands, my lanterns flickering in a wind I could not feel. I was 4 feet deep now, deep enough that the walls of the grave rose above my head, deep enough that I could not see over them without jumping. I was trapped, and something was out there in the darkness, waiting. That was when I heard the whispers. They started as a hiss, a sibilant sound that could have been wind through dry leaves, could have been the rustle of fabric against stone. But it grew louder, more distinct, and I realized with growing horror that it was not one voice but many. Dozens of voices. Hundreds. All speaking at once in a language I did not recognize, a language that sounded ancient and broken and wrong. The whispers overlapped and intertwined, creating a sound that was almost musical but deeply, profoundly alien. It was like hearing a recording played backward. Familiar phonemes twisted into something unrecognizable, something that the human mouth was never meant to produce. I pressed my hands against my ears, but the whispers did not diminish. They were not coming from outside me. They were inside my head, slithering through my thoughts like worms through soft earth. I could feel them probing, searching, looking for something, looking for a way in. "Stop," I begged, sinking to my knees in the mud at the bottom of the grave. "Please stop." The whispers stopped. For one blessed moment, there was silence. True silence. The silence of a world holding its breath. And then a voice spoke. Clear. Distinct. Rising above the darkness like a beacon. "Samuel." My blood froze. I knew that voice. I knew it better than I knew my own. It was a voice I had not heard in 22 years. A voice that had read me bedtime stories and taught me to fish, and held me when I cried at my grandmother's funeral. It was my grandfather's voice. "Samuel." The voice said again, gentle and warm, exactly the way he used to say my name when I was a boy. "Why are you digging in the dark? I told you never to dig in the dark." I looked up. The voice was coming from above me, from the edge of the grave, just beyond the reach of my lantern's light. I could see a shape there, a dark silhouette against the darker sky. It was the shape of a man I had buried with my own hands in the winter of 1997. "Grandfather?" The word came out as a croak, barely audible. "Come up here, Samuel. I need to show you something. I need to show you what we've been protecting all these years." I found myself moving toward the wall of the grave, my hands reaching for the wooden ladder I had left propped against the side. Some part of my brain was screaming at me to stop, to think, to remember that my grandfather had been dead for more than 2 decades. But the voice was so real, so familiar, so exactly like him that I could not resist. My fingers touched the ladder rung. And then I looked down. The bottom of the grave was moving. At first, I thought it was my imagination, a trick of the flickering lantern light, a shadow cast by the clouds passing overhead. But it was not a shadow. The soil at the bottom of the grave was shifting, churning, pushing upward as if something beneath it was trying to break through. I watched in paralyzed horror as a shape began to emerge from the clay. A hand. A pale, grayish-white hand with fingers that were too long, too thin, too many. I counted them as they clawed their way out of the earth, one by one. 4 fingers. 5. 6. The hand reached toward me, and my grandfather's voice spoke again, but this time it was coming from below. From the hand. From the thing that was climbing up through the bottom of a grave that I had been digging for only 3 hours. "Come down here, Samuel. Come down here with me. I have so much to show you." I do not remember climbing out of that grave. I do not remember running through the cemetery, tripping over headstones, tearing my clothes on iron fences. I do not remember the screaming, though my throat was raw for days afterward, so I must have screamed. I remember only one moment with perfect clarity. The moment I burst through the main gate of Oak Shadow Cemetery and collapsed on the asphalt of the county road, gasping for air, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would explode. And when I looked back, when I forced myself to turn around and look back at the cemetery I had just fled, I saw a figure standing at the gate. A tall, thin figure with arms that hung too long and a head that tilted at an angle no human neck could achieve. It raised one hand, a hand with 6 fingers, and waved. I did not go back that night. I walked to a farmhouse half a mile down the road, a place owned by an elderly couple named Patterson who had known my family for generations. They found me on their porch at nearly midnight, covered in grave dirt, shaking so badly I could not speak. Mrs. Patterson wrapped me in a blanket, and Mr. Patterson poured me a glass of whiskey that I downed in a single swallow. I did not tell them what had happened. I could not. What words could possibly describe what I had seen? In the morning, I called Henry Garrett and told him there had been an emergency. He arranged for 2 workers from a funeral home in Nashville to complete the grave. Their names were Marcus and Danny, and they arrived at Oak Shadow just after dawn. I was there when they finished. I had to know, I had to see, and I will never forget the look on their faces when they climbed out of the completed grave. They were pale, trembling. They would not meet my eyes. Marcus pulled me aside while Danny loaded their equipment. His voice was barely a whisper. "I don't know what happened in that hole last night," he said, "but something is wrong with it. When we got there this morning, the grave was only about 4 feet deep, but at the bottom we found marks, scratches in the clay walls, like something was trying to climb out, and there was a handprint pressed into the soil, a handprint with 6 fingers. He left without saying another word. He and Danny drove away and never returned to Ridley County. I heard later that Marcus quit the funeral business entirely and took a job at a hardware store in Memphis. I do not blame him. Some things change you forever. Some things cannot be unseen. I went to my grandfather's grave that afternoon. He is buried near the old chapel at the edge of the hollow, beneath a weathered headstone that reads, "Elijah Dawson, 1921 to 1997, beloved father and grandfather." I stood there for a long time, staring at his name, trying to reconcile the loving man who had raised me with the voice that had called to me from the darkness, the voice that had tried to lure me down into the earth. It was not him. I know that now. Whatever spoke with my grandfather's voice was not my grandfather. It was something else, something old, something hungry, something that has lived beneath Oak Shadow Cemetery since long before the first grave was dug. Something that knows us, studies us, learns our voices, our faces, our weaknesses. Something that waits for us to break the rules. I still work at Oak Shadow. I still dig graves and maintain the grounds and help families say goodbye to their loved ones. But I have never stayed past sunset again. Not once. Not for any reason. When the sun touches the horizon, I drop my tools where I stand and leave. I do not look back. I do not hesitate. I do not give that thing another chance to speak my name. The younger workers laugh at me sometimes. They think I am a superstitious old fool, clinging to outdated traditions. They do not believe in the rule. They do not understand why it exists. But I notice that the ones who laugh the loudest are the ones who have never worked in the hollow after dark. And I notice that the ones who stop laughing, the ones who grow quiet and pale and start leaving before sunset, are the ones who have. Some rules are meant to be broken. But not this one. Never this one. My grandfather tried to warn me. 3 generations of grave diggers tried to warn me. And now I am warning you. If you ever find yourself in a cemetery as the sun begins to set, leave. Do not convince yourself you have a few more minutes. Do not tell yourself you will be fine. Do not listen to the voices that might call your name from the shadows, especially if those voices belong to people you love. Just leave, because the dead do not always stay dead. And when the sun goes down, the things that live beneath the graves wake up hungry. They are patient. They have been waiting for centuries. And once they speak your name, once they learn your voice, once they find the shape of your grief and your love and your longing, they will never stop calling. I hear my grandfather's voice in my dreams sometimes. He asks me to come back. He says he has something to show me. He says I should not be afraid. But I am afraid. I will be afraid until the day I die. And when that day comes, when they finally lower me into the ground at Oak Shadow Cemetery, I pray that whoever digs my grave finishes before sunset. Because if they do not, I know what will be waiting for them at the bottom of the hole. It will wear my face. It will speak with my voice. And it will be so very, very hungry. The night belongs to them. And once you are in their territory, once you have broken the rule, once you have dug into their earth after dark, there is no guarantee you will ever leave. So I ask you one last time, and I beg you to remember my words. Never dig a grave after sunset. Because the things that climb up from the darkness do not give second chances. They do not show mercy. They only know how to hunger and how to wait and how to call your name with voices you cannot resist. And they have all the time in the world.